Shoot every dog in sight. That was an order given to every German soldier in 1941 during World War II. Hey, I'm Alex Lam, and in this episode of Stories of the World, we'll be talking about the anti-tank dogs in World War II. No, dogs weren't trained to wield guns and fight in the war. Instead, man's best friend was strapped with explosives, trained to run under tanks, and were blown up. They were essentially suicide bombers. This story is evidence of how war breeds atrocities. And it's already incredibly upsetting that such an idea was even thought up, but it was actually implemented. Anyway, let's get to the story. In 1924, the Revolutionary Military Council of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics approved of the use of dogs for military purposes. During this time, all the military dog jobs were relatively humane. They had a whole range of tasks such as rescue, delivery of first aid, delivering messages, tracking mines and people, transporting food, medicine, and pulling the sleds with injured soldiers. So you get the point, all the jobs were very humane. So a specialized dog training school was founded in Moscow Oblast, and 12 regional schools were opened soon after. But they had a major problem. The Red Army had no dedicated dog trainers, so what did they do? They recruited a whole range of people. They recruited hunters, policemen, and even circus trainers. Also, several animal scientists were involved to help create a wide-scale and effective training program. All different types of dog breeds were used, but the German Shepherds were found to be ideal for their physical abilities and ease of training. The program proved to be a success. It was later in the 1930s when the idea of using dogs as mobile mines were discussed. Then in 1935, the anti-tank dog units were officially included in the Red Army. Now, the original idea was for a dog to carry a bomb strapped to its body, and upon reaching the target, the dog would then release the bomb by pulling with its own teeth, releasing the belt, and return to the trainer. Then the bomb could then be detonated by a timer or a remote control. Now, a group of dogs practiced for 6 months, but reports show that not a single dog could master the task. They performed well on a single target, but became confused after the target of location was changed and often returned to the operator with the bomb unreleased. In a live situation, this would have killed both the dog and the operator. With the constant failures and huge investment into the program, they were forced to simplify the method, and it was then decided to just detonate the bomb along with the dog. So instead of training the dog to do all that extra stuff, all they had to do was teach the dog how to locate the target, which was simplified to just finding any enemy tanks. The dogs were trained via a very cruel method. They were kept hungry and the trainers placed food under the tanks. At first, the tanks were left standing still. Then they had their engines running, then added real gunfire and other battle-related distractions. This was to teach the dogs to run under tanks in real-life battle situations. So with the revised plan, they had to revise the dog's outfit. Each dog was fitted with 10 to 12 kilograms of explosives carried in 2 canvas pouches. The mine had a safety pin which was removed before deployment, sort of like a grenade, and it was not supposed to be disarmed. A wooden lever extended out of the pouch about 20 centimeters in height on their backs. The idea was that when the dog dived under the tank, the lever would strike the bottom of the tank and detonate the charge. And because the under parts of the chassis were the most vulnerable area of the tanks, it was expected that the explosion would disable the vehicle. The first deployment of the anti-tank dogs was in the summer of 1941 and included 30 dogs and 40 trainers. And it was a complete disaster. There was a lot of problems. First, during the training, dogs were trained with tanks that stood still and did not fire its guns. So in the actual battlefield, the dogs refused to run under any moving tanks. Some dogs even stood by waiting for the tanks to stop, but were shot dead. Second, the dogs were scared of the gunfire and would run back into the trenches, often detonating the bomb, jumping in and killing the Soviet soldiers. And to prevent this, the returning dogs had to be shot by their operators, which made the trainers unwilling to work with any new dogs. Out of the first group of 30 dogs, only 4 managed to detonate their bombs near German tanks. 6 exploded when returning to the Soviet trenches, killing and injuring soldiers. 3 were shot by German troops and taken away, which provided examples of the detonation mechanism to the Germans. And if that wasn't bad enough, it was later revealed that they had another serious training flaw. The Soviets used their own diesel engines to train the dogs, rather than the German tanks, which had gasoline engines. And because dogs rely on their keen sense of smell, they would seek out Soviet tanks instead of the German tanks, which meant the Soviets had been training dogs to sabotage their own army. The German forces learned about the Soviet dog bombs from 1941 onwards, and the Germans had a very simple solution. It was to shoot any dogs in the combat areas. The effectiveness wore off, and after 1942, the dog training facilities were redirected into producing mine-seeking and delivery dogs. Interestingly, training anti-tank dogs continued all the way until June of 1996. Overall, the effectiveness of anti-tank dogs in World War II remains unclear. Soviet sources claim that around 300 German tanks were damaged, but Russian historians believed it was just propaganda trying to justify the anti-tank dog program. However, there are documented claims of success of anti-tank dog units. Here's a few examples. The first was at the front of the 160th Infantry Division of Hilgif. I can't pronounce it. Anyway, 6 dogs had damaged 5 German tanks. Another was near the airport of Stalingrad. The dogs destroyed 13 tanks. And at the Battle of Kursk, 16 dogs disabled 12 German tanks. Now, surprisingly, the Soviets were not the only ones to strap bombs to dogs. The Imperial Japanese Army had dogs trained to pull carts packed with explosives, but had little success due to the poor training. In the late 1940s, the Viet Minh forces used anti-tank dogs in the fighting in Indochina. In 1943, the US forces considered using armed dogs against fortifications. The aim was for a dog to run into the bunker carrying a bomb, which would then be detonated by a timer. The program was terminated due to safety concerns. During training, the dogs would often run back to the operators, which would have caused casualties in a real-life situation. In 2006, the rebels attempted to use dogs carrying explosives during the Iraq War, but had no success. Instead, they used donkeys, which had more success because donkeys could carry more explosives, and it actually looked natural on the donkey, drawing less suspicions. Now, allowing dogs to be serving in the military is, for me, already a very fine line, but turning them into suicide bombers is just simply wrong. And I think it's incredibly sad that some people actually think this is okay, sacrificing a life for some sort of military gain. Now, I know for a fact, there can be a lot of different arguments that can be raised. Just for the sake of things, I won't be discussing any of those. This video is purely just to tell the story of the anti-tank dogs and bring awareness, so hopefully it doesn't ever happen again. So that's the story of the anti-tank dogs. If you guys found this video informative, hit the like button and subscribe if you want to hear more stories. Also, be sure to check out my previous videos. I'm Alex Lam, and this is Stories of the World. Whew.